Now he makes this statement here that's quite interesting. He says, "For bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable unto all things, having promise of the life that now is, and of that which is to come." Now, there are those that believe that Paul here is downgrading bodily exercise. I don't understand it that way. After all, I want you to look at that man for just a moment. I think that Paul attended the games that they had in those great Colosseums in that day. Now, Paul spent several years in Ephesus, about 3 years. When he was there was a great Colosseum in which they actually had the Olympic Games at times. And they had the races there, that is, men running. And it would seat 100,000 people. And Paul uses the figure of the race of that day and makes a correspondence to the Christian life and the Christian walk, and that the Christian life is actually a race in and of itself. May I say to you, this man knew a great deal about it. I believe he exercised. And then somebody said, "Can you be sure of that?" Yes, and I'll tell you, when this was made very emphatic to me, when I stood yonder in the city of Sardis, that is the ruins, and I looked down, they've excavated part of the Roman road there, and I looked down that Roman road to the east, and Paul came down that road. Then I looked down that road going to the west. And I thought, the man that came along here 1,900 years preaching the gospel of Christ, he didn't travel in a bus or in an automobile. He didn't travel either by horse or even by donkey. Paul walked that. And it took a rugged individual to cover the ground that this man covered throughout the Roman Empire. And when he was not going by ship, he spent most of that period walking. That was his method. And I don't think he did much jogging, but I think Paul did a great deal of walking, and that is something that, is recommended today. Now, all Paul is saying here is, and these people were given over to games, to athletics, and we've become that kind of a nation. Every city today has built a great Colosseum where great spectacles are conducted, and a great many Christians put more emphasis upon this than they do upon the things of God. I know that there are today church officers that will spend more time in the summertime in the ballpark than they spend in the prayer meeting. And all Paul is saying, he's not saying that's wrong. What he's saying is this: let's hold things in the correct perspective. Bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable for all things. Now, what is the difference between the two as far as importance is concerned? Well, bodily exercise will only help you in this life, because when you get a new body, it won't make any difference whether you exercise in this body or not. But godliness, and this, my friend, is indicative of something. If you listen to Paul here, godliness is profitable to all things. Now, there are those that are saying today, well, a Christian can come back to God on easy terms, and he can. I emphasize that. And a Christian can get in sin, fine, that's true, he can, and he can come back to God. But my friend, a godly life pays off not only down here, but it'll pay off in eternity, whereas the prodigal son lost a great deal by going to the far country. And any Christian that's living a careless life and not living a godly life will find out that even in eternity, he'll have to pay for that sort of thing. Paul is saying, if you give yourself to bodily exercise, then fine. I think Paul did it. But he said, wait a minute. What about godliness? Are you as anxious about godliness as you are about physical exercise, about athletic events? And remember that the physical exercise ends at the end of this life, but godliness is carried over to the next. Now, this is very important, I think, for us to see. And he says this, he puts an emphasis on it in verse 9 now, chapter 4 of 1 Timothy. This is a faithful saying, and it's worthy of all acceptance. In other words, he says, here's something you can count on. You can count on it in Ephesus in the 1st century, and you can count on it in Los Angeles in the 20th century, and you'll be able to count on it in the 21st century if we make